Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me today for the monthly Microsoft Security CISO workshop. This will be the first one of the year. Today's agenda, we'll go over some of the news that we made aware of. We'll talk about the Microsoft exposure management, and then we'll take any questions and answers that we've got at the end. Hopefully, as I say, this will be more of an informational session, as this is a brand new feature that's just been launched. As always, we start on our news, and I think what has been fantastic is Microsoft 365 Copilot or Copilot agents are now available for everybody. So you no longer do you need to have your own Copilot for M365. You can use Copilot Studio, create your own agents, and that is available at a penny a message. This is a great way for you to start testing Copilot or Copilot Studio, upload some repositories, but go and have a look at that and explore it. For the people who haven't got M365 Copilot yet, the promotion's been extended till the end of June, where you get a discount for 10 licenses or more for the first year. So again, speak to your account manager, explore it. On a very positive news is Azure consumption cost has been announced for price harmonization. There'll be a 5 to 6% reduction from the 1st of Feb. This may even apply to some other licenses. So for organizations who have renewals coming due, explore this with your account manager and avoid the 1st of April increase of 5%. Looking at the exchange rate, I don't know how long this will last, so let's take full advantage while it's available. And then finally, the subject that we will be doing today is exposure management, which is now generally available since December across all tenants. And what we will do today is go through exposure management in a significantly more detail to understand how it can help organizations as we move forward. There's been a number of other announcements, but we will keep these you updated as more and more of this information is coming out. As I said, every day is school day with Microsoft. Let's get started. Exposure management. Microsoft Security Exposure Management is a security solution that provides a unified view of security posture across a company, assets, and workloads. What a mouthful to try and say on my first slide. And I think what the security exposure management is a way for you to understand where is the risks inside my information in my organization. We've all been familiar with patching. Let's try and patch all the vulnerabilities. Let's try and get our secure score as high as possible. But actually, where is the threat across my organization? If we look at some of the statistics, for example, 92% of successful breaches come from unmanaged devices. How do we know where's our unmanaged device? Do we know which of our critical assets need to be patched to reduce our risk? And I think this is where it's changed, is let's look at our risk in our organization and try and deal with those exposure risks instead of trying to spend hours trying to patch a workstation that nobody's got access to because it's got the most vulnerabilities, but it's impossible to reach the machine, for example. And we will explore some of this in more detail. Now, with the Microsoft Security Exposure Management, what they've tried to do is give you a unified view across your organization, bring together all of your Defender for Identity, Defender for Endpoint. There's about 12 solutions and 7 is connected natively, and then you can bring in external sources from them at the moment, which is limited, like Tenable.io as an example. But what it will help you do is understand, manage, and investigate where's your attack surfaces, what is our attack paths, what is our critical assets, do we have potential exposure to those critical assets, and how do we ensure that people do not get access, or how do we limit some of those exposure? And finally, you can connect other sources into the environment. As I mentioned, it's only been general availability since the beginning of December. So I'm expecting significantly more sources that you can bring into your environment to help you explore the attack surface as we move forward. The next question I'd already have while we've been speaking with customers is, how do I license exposure management? How much is it going to cost me? The great news is it's available free of charge. Well, if you have a qualifying license, nothing is free, unfortunately. If you have any of these qualifying licenses, you will automatically get exposure management in your security.microsoft.com portal. This is great news for organizations who runs various solutions. So we can see here, for example, M365 E5, E3, E3 with Enterprise Mobility and Security add-on, A3, EMNS, Defender for Identity, Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Cloud Apps, or Defender for Office. I've had the questions as well, what about Business Premium? It does not appear here. Although it's not specifically listed, because it's got Defender for Office 365 Plan 1 included, it does currently appear. I do not know what the long-term plan is, but currently, even for Business Premium customers, exposure management is available. What this means is for majority of customers who's got any security turned on, this will be available and active in their portals. Now, with exposure, where do you normally start? In exposure management, you'll get your exposure overview. What this will do is tell you very quickly how many devices, how many resources, how many identities has been identified inside your organization. So it just tells you what assets do you have inside your organizations. You will also be able to see what key initiatives you are targeting in your organizations, and what you will be able to do is mark the favorite ones that you are trying to address inside your organization. If you're using it for the first time, you might see blank initiatives, which means that there's no data currently if you have not connected the connectors. For example, external attack surface management is normally one that I see quite often in customers where they've got no data currently, where they haven't configured it or haven't connected it. And for your overview is, what are the key initiatives that you want to focus on? There's a number of key initiatives. The list is continuously growing, and we will deep dive into that more. But for you as an organization, if that's one of your key initiatives that you're trying to focus on, have that in your initial dashboard. So it's a quick way of seeing what your score is, what's happening, and if there's any areas that you need to address. You can then go and have a look at your attack surface map. You can see, for example, this will give you a quick overview of your assets and the critical assets that's been identified inside your organizations. It's split into three categories: your cloud assets, your devices, which can be on-prem or cloud, and identities. And under each of these areas, you'll see the number of critical assets that's been identified based on criteria that you've created inside your organization to define what is my business critical assets. What I then get normally is, well, what is a critical asset? How do we determine how we're going to have a critical asset? How do we go and label the critical asset? If you go into your security.microsoft.com, go into settings and then go into Microsoft Defender XDR, you can expand, and under rules, you'll see there's a section called critical asset management. Under that, you can create your classifications and reassign what is classed as a critical assets. There's a predefined 88 classifications already inside your organization that is out the box, but it doesn't stop you from defining other rules, other criteria regarding what are critical assets in your organizations. And I cannot stress this enough. You've got to set those critical assets that is key to your business if they don't appear natively in the list. Because if you don't, there might be areas that is missed with the solutions, missed with the attack paths that's being identified. So spend some time on it, have a look at what those are, review what has been defined as critical assets in your organizations, and then reclassify those as needed or create additional rules to identify those critical assets for you automatically. The good news is, once you've created the rule, any new resources you add into the environment, anything else you do, will automatically be defined. What you can then move on to is what we call your attack path overview. With your attack path overview, it will identify you over the last 30 days, how many new attack paths has been identified, are they increasing, where are they increasing. This is just a graphical interface. I'll be honest with you, don't really spend any time on that. The area that you want to concentrate on is the actual attack paths that's been identified in your organizations. And then once we move into attack paths, it will help identify devices, accounts that's got access or that's got high severity vulnerabilities or risks to your critical assets. The way that I would normally deal with this area is you have a number of filter boxes at the top and you can select the risk level. My view is start with your critical and high risks and then move down to medium risks. All organizations will have risks constantly inside the business, but let's start off by addressing the critical and high risks and then move down to the medium risks. There's always devices that needs patching. There's always new vulnerabilities that comes out. But what you want to understand is which one of these devices has the most vulnerabilities that could lead to a critical compromise of my critical asset. Yes, we should secure all devices, but there's limited time, and let's start with the highest risk and work our way down to securing the rest of our organization. So again, you can have a look at that. You'll get a good understanding regarding what is involved, what's a device that's attacked. So we can see, for example, a device with high severity that allows access to a storage account, key vault, device, subscription, but you can start seeing where those attack paths leads into your critical assets. And if we look into it, you can break down, once you've identified, you can start breaking down what are those devices. So we can see, for example, a device with a high severity vulnerability, where's the entry point, where's the target account, and what is the risk level, and how many targets how many assets will be affected if that device is compromised. We can also see the recommendations that is being recommended to secure those devices or improve the security. So if we click on the recommendations, you can see, for example, devices should have vulnerabilities findings resolved. So you can see if you have a device with a high vulnerability, what should be done. You can see which workload have identified that potential path and help you prioritize where you're going to be dealing with the vulnerability on that device or those particular assets that you need to protect. What you have as well in any organization is what we classify as choke points. With choke points, it is an asset or an account that is involved in multiple attack paths. And you can very quickly understand what are those device or account and the risk level associated. And this is a great way, again, to say, is there a specific device that's involved in multiple paths that I can go and patch or secure to reduce the risk into my critical asset? And this is a great way to look at, again, tend to work on your critical, high, medium risks first. Low risks are low risks to have in place. From a security point of view, the low risks, yes, need to be addressed, but it's a low risk for a reason. And you can see all of your attack paths that is coming into the environment, how many that particular account, that particular device, and how many attack paths is involved, and should you address it or not. And you can decide from your point of view, it's acceptable risks or it's an unacceptable risk. But this is a great point to say, do we have any particular choke point involved in multiple attack paths that we should address? Once you look at the choke point, you can see on that choke point, what is the vulnerabilities that's associated with that choke point. So you can go and see the CVE articles that's related to it. We could get other information, but you can also look at the attack paths it's involved in and see the blast radius. And the blast radius is a fantastic way for you to actually understand what would happen if that machine or that identity is compromised, because it gives you a good visual view of what's the potential impact. Because let's be honest, attackers don't look at vulnerabilities, they look for an entry point, and then what can I see? What can I get to once I have that in place? A couple of things that I'd just like to highlight on this area. For example, if it's a device, you'll see the vulnerability, and if it's got a little red icon, which is quite small here, but you'll see red icons means that it's been actively exploited in the wild. On top of any of these blast radius, if you turn on the discovery source, it will tell you from where it's picking up the information. That could be Defender for identity, Defender for cloud, Defender for endpoint. And we'll go through this in more detail as we move forward. But from your point of view, this is a great visual way to understand. And if I just go back one slide, is have a look at, so with your choke points, you can look at the vulnerabilities on the device, understand the attack paths, understand exactly what's involved, and address it. That's normally a good place to start. Is do we have any choke points with medium, high, critical exposure, and then start working through the rest of the environment. And as I said, please ask questions and I will do my best to answer all questions at the end. So as we go along, don't hesitate to ask, because I know this is new for everybody and it is relatively new for even ourselves. It's only been out, as I say, in general availability, although we've been involved since preview. The next area to look at is what we call domain initiatives. These are initiatives that you would like to focus on and areas that you would like to improve inside your organization. For every system or every organization, we have secure score, which is fantastic, and I'll cover that a little bit later, but that can sometimes be a massive over challenging project to resolve. And we normally say try and aim to get above 80% in your secure score. However, as an organization, you might want to pick some of these initiatives that CISOs have identified and that organizations have identified that you want to prioritize, because you want to approach your risk one step at a time. For example, you can say, we would want to deal with our vulnerability or our endpoint security. Where do we want to go to? You can decide which of these initiatives you want to focus on and prioritize. You can mark them as your favorite, and then that will bring it back into your, when we done the exposure overview landing page, they will be the ones that appears on the front page. But every day you can get an update regarding what's changed in the environment. Is there a bigger risk? What is our score? And you can start monitoring these areas for improvements and risk reduction. And as I say, for most organizations, choose 2 or 3 to start with. Some choose 1, some choose more. But I would say pick 2 or 3, get it right, and then move forward. As I say, prioritize what you're going to do. But any changes you implement here will feed through to your secure score, but give you a great way of managing your risks and understanding how you can manage those areas. You've also got threat initiatives. This is relatively new. But if there's this particular threat that you want to protect yourself against or you are concerned about, you can see some of the active profiles that's out there in the wild. And again, you can prioritize the ones that you want to address, because it might be targeting your industry. You might, for some reason, find that you are at higher potential risk based on the type of organization you are. Again, you can identify these types of risks and make sure you prioritize the actions to reduce the risk against these type of threats. As I say, a lot of this is still in preview, but definitely worth exploring if you haven't done so. Now, once you've selected your initiative, you can set your target score. For some organizations, 100%. For some, it might be 90. By default, it is set to 99%. But again, you need to look through what licenses do you have, what risks are acceptable to the business, how do we mitigate those recommendations, and then decide what you want to set your target score on. But as I say, prioritize your initiatives, and I'm going to keep repeating that because I work with organizations who says, well, we want to do it all. And that's a great way, but you're never going to get there. Pick one, improve the score, move on to the next area. You can then also see your metrics where you potentially have with your highest risk and your tensions. Again, start looking at these areas of the metrics in place. So for example, what SSLs has expired on this sample page? How many assets is being affected? what needs to be done? How compliant are you? And this will tell you the areas that you need to address first. What is the risk and the weight of these metrics? The good news is you can reassign the weight if it's not as important to you. For example, recently expired SSL certificates might become a low risk because these are the auto-rotating SSL certificates that's only live for 3 months. It's associated with our website, and it's coming from our external attack surface management. So we're going to put maybe a low priority against that. But again, you can start looking at through all of these metrics and recommendation metrics, reclassify them, and start monitoring these on a more active basis. We've also got the section that as we've got is recommendations. And I think for organizations goes, well, where do we start? Well, the great news is by default, when you look at your recommendations, there's about 280 from memory by default. First, get yourself thinking, well, where are we? So the great news is filter out where you are compliant. Go and first identify how much have we achieved as an organization. So in this example, for example, we can see 183 of these areas is compliant at the moment, which is fantastic. But then I can go and select which of mine is non-compliant, relook at these recommendations and decide, should I mitigate those because they managed somewhere else by the organization, or no, we're not compliant and we should address these. And again, this is just another way to look through what are the recommendations across the organizations. And as I say, use the filters to deal with that. Now, with Secure Score, I then get the questions, well, is Secure Score still relevant? Well, Secure Score is absolutely still relevant. We still want you to achieve 80%. We still want you to achieve this data and make the progress that you require on a day-to-day basis, but it's your overall security score. If we go and look at, for example, vulnerability management, you might have a great secure score, but there might be some critical assets that is missed overall that is a high risk to the business. But because the majority of your assets are patched, you will still get a decent secure score. But if we then go back to your vulnerability management, or if that's one of your key initiatives, you will have a way to understand if there's certain assets that is potentially high risk to the business. It's a different way of looking at your security, looking at your vulnerability, looking at your risks inside the business. And I think that's a bit that I would like to reiterate. This is not a replacement for Secure Score. It's not a replacement for anything else, but it is a different way of looking at your exposure. And for a lot of organizations, this might going to take a little while to get used to, understand how we're going to do our risk-based approach. But for organizations, it is a much cleaner and easier way to understand where our risks are. And I am aware today this is a relatively short webinar area, but it is a brand new section. It is very self-explanatory. And if you're unsure, don't hesitate to engage with your account managers or reach out to myself or reach out to any of our colleagues regarding these type of exposure management. We're seeing for a lot of organizations, they are rethinking their approach. And that's probably the biggest challenge. How do we change how we deal with these? Because we all love working off lists. Attackers don't do lists. Attackers try and find an entry point and move laterally. So let's try and think, yes, we got to do our vulnerability. Yes, we got our vulnerability management in place, but let's think like an attacker. All we need is one weak point, and from that weak point, how can I move laterally? And with exposure management, it's going to provide you with the ability to start seeing where your risks are, and can you maybe rethink of the way you want to address the risks inside the organization. Now, in summary, and I know, as I said, this is a relatively short webinar this week, this month, is define your critical assets. And that's probably the key. The number of organizations I engage with that don't really know what their critical assets are or think they know what their critical assets are, it's interesting. address your highest risk to these critical assets. What are the attack paths and my highest risks? For example, do I have a separate admin account without strong MFA turned on? Why do I have a secondary account, as an example? And then start planning and prioritize your initiatives. What is risky to the business? Is it business email compromise? Is it fraud? Is it, for example, attacks on or endpoint compromise, crypto viruses? What are the priorities to the organization? Define those, prioritize those, and then patch the systems on a day-to-day basis. And as I said, thank you very much. It's a relatively short session this month because it's a brand new area, but it's very interesting. And I think for organizations, we are going to see significant development in this area and more information being made available. Now, I am going to go to the questions and answer section. So if anybody's got questions and answers, please feel free to ask those, and I will leave you while I answer the questions. I'm just going to leave you with this page up to remind you that we do have a CISO webinar on the 19th of Feb, where we will be looking more at security in Business Premium. We can look at the Secure 365, talk to us about assessments and anything else in the survey. But let me get on to the questions today. And as I said, it was quite a short session, so hopefully we have that in place. What do you need to enable so that on-prem, let me just look through here. Thanks for joining us, just looking at the questions. So what do we need to be enabled so on-premise devices are seen? As long as you've got Defender for Endpoint on those devices will be seen and picked up. So it comes through from the Defender for Endpoint P2, or as I said, if we go back to, and I'm just going to skip back to the licenses right at the beginning. Sorry, I'm just going to go back to the license page because I think this will be useful. If we skip here, if you've got any of these solutions or deployed inside your organization, you will start seeing the on-prem devices. So for your on-prem environment, think about what you've got. So if you've got Defender for Server, for example, you'll probably deploy that via Arc and leverage Defender for Server P2 onto your on-prem servers. If it is workstations, laptops, etc., you'll be leveraging the Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Business in that area that will be reporting back. So as long as you've got Defender on, it will be understand what that exposure is with your Defender for Server, your Defender for IoT as well. So if there's Internet of Things deployed, if you've got Defender for IoT onto your environment, it will help you publish that and identify those risks inside the organization. So that's what you really need for your on-prem devices. If you have any on-prem devices that is not managed, then no, there's going to be a gap in there. But the good news is with Defender for Endpoint P2, you've got the Defender for IoT included for the E5 customers. You've got the Defender for Endpoint, and those will all be included inside the risks and inside the composure from being able to identify those attack paths. Hope that answers the question. If not, please feel free to reach out to me and we can help you identify if there's any other areas. Any other questions while we wait? I'm just going to open that up and see if there's any more questions that's coming in at the moment. We've also been asked before, the one that I do see quite regularly is new initiatives being published, my initiative score dropping significantly suddenly. As Microsoft keeps adding more of these initiatives into these areas, we do see these scores changing on a regular basis. So just be aware of it. Know that it's coming, know that there's more recommendations that's constantly evolved, and that can affect some of these initiative scores. So go and review these. If you see a sudden drop, it's probably that new features has been deployed or new risks has been identified inside the organization. Hopefully that's answered all of the questions. If we don't have any more, as I say, feel free to reach out to myself. Do give some feedback. As I said, this week has been a very quick webinar because it's quite robust. But from a point of view, very pleased Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Do go and look at it if you haven't. Try it out. Reach out to your security representative or your account managers. They can help you with it. So feel free to put any questions to myself. I'll do my best. And look forward to seeing you for the next event series workshop on the 19th of February. If you want to have a more in-depth interactive session, as I say, please feel free to reach out to me. And thank you very much for joining us today. And please do complete the feedback forms. Thank you.